Welcome back to the channel, everybody. And today we've got an interesting one, as you may not have actually seen it, as it's flown pretty far under the radar, airstrike joke, in the news cycle. And that is that the rules of engagement for airstrikes have actually been massively changed by the Department of Defense a few days ago down at the southern border. And this actually is most likely going to have pretty huge implications going forward as escalation at the southern border continues to ramp up. Now, in honor of the episode today, I have on my Special Operations Tactical Air Controller t-shirt. Yes, I was a JTAC. For those of you who don't know what those terms mean, it's the controller on the ground who guides in airstrikes. Okay. Was I a very good JTAC? No. Did they ever let me do real strikes on real targets? No. However, I do actually understand the strike approval process very intimately, so I'm going to be able to walk you guys through that today. So first thing we need to do is actually take a look at the article from the Air Force Times put out of what's actually being changed, and then I'm going to walk you guys through how this whole thing works. I'm going to talk about what aircraft and strikes I potentially see in the near future if we're going to use them, and what implications this might have going forward. All right, as you see right here, Air Force Times, Trump administration eases restrictions on military airstrikes. All right, what does that actually mean? Let's jump into it. Okay. President Donald Trump's administration is loosening restrictions on military airstrikes by giving commanders more autonomy to make lethal decisions, according to the U.S. defense official. New rules allow high-ranking military officers to fire at targets without White House approval. That's going to be very important as we talk about this. As long as the targets previously received official terrorist designations, which the cartels have, right? All right, moving down. The newly granted authority, the official said, is in part a response to the former administration's substantial involvement in approving airstrikes. Okay, we'll talk about that, which military leaders felt was outsized and led to slow response times for eliminating time-sensitive targets like terrorists. All right, so let me explain what all this means. All right, so when you're talking about the White House approval process having to be involved, that's how the last administration was, right? So if I need to have an airstrike, and I'm going to juxtapose Afghanistan, how it works there, and then we'll talk about how it's going to work moving forward. So if I wanted in previous years to do an airstrike, someone in the cartels on the border, whatever, that approval would go all the way to Joe Biden, the commander-in-chief at the White House. Who knows what he's doing at the time? Let's say you've got some cartel member setting in an IED somewhere at the border. You can see it. You can't strike him, even if you can see him doing it. You have to get approval all the way from the president, which who knows? That could take days. And at that point, that dude's long gone. So it doesn't do you any good. Okay. So what this is changing it to be is that basically high level, most likely it will be general officers who are potentially in charge of those areas will be giving strike approval authority. All right. Earlier times in Iraq and Afghanistan, like when I was there, this is how this works when you have loosened rules of engagement. So what does this look like in Afghanistan? Okay. So you have, and also understand, guys, what you're striking is also typically going to have different levels of strike approval. What I mean by levels is what rank of officer is approved to stamp that for you to drop munitions. Okay. So let's say, we want to strike someone out in the open or a vehicle. It's not near any civilians. We know it's all terrorists inside. That may be a 1-star general that could stamp that approval. Let's say we need to strike a building that's potentially defensive fighting position, right, in an urban area. That's a lot more potential for civilian casualties, things like that. It's going to move up echelons to maybe a 2-star. Okay, so 2-star general. So like in Afghanistan at the CJSOTF, which is sort of for us the Command Joint Special Operations Task Force, you have most likely a 2-star general in charge. He's the one that's blessing off on the strikes. It doesn't have to go all the way back to Washington to the commander-in-chief for this to happen. Okay, so that's what this is being transitioned to at the southern border. Why is that important? Well, now, if you guys remember, maybe it was a week or two ago when those cartel members started taking pop shots at the border control agents and they were looking down on them. Let's say you've got a Reaper or Predator drone that's watching this happen. You can now have the on-site general officer commander just immediately approve that strike. And now all of a sudden the Hellfire is being dropped. Those dudes are gone. That could have never happened with the previous rules of engagement that we were sitting under. Okay, so that should hopefully kind of make sense of how these approval authorities work. Right, so no longer commander in chief. I don't know exactly yet because this is new at what level these strikes could be approved. I'm going to most likely assume it's probably a 2-star general, whoever is in charge down at their border, doing that type of thing. All right, so what's the biggest net positive of this? Quick reaction. Okay, so we're going to actually be able to strike things like, small scale skirmishes, like I just mentioned about vehicle interdiction, right? If cartel members are trying to escape on vehicles, motorcycles, whatever, be able to strike those at pretty rapid pace. And it's also, this is pretty significant. Probably the most significant thing about this is it's kind of an acknowledgement of a war zone-esque type of conflict at the southern border, right? If we're now giving approval authority for airstrikes on Mexican soil, okay, to a 1 or 2-star general, not the president, that's a massive ramp up in potential escalation moving forward, guys. All right, next we're going to talk about what are these airstrikes potentially going to look like? What aircraft platform are most likely going to be the ones being used in the near term? But before we do that, let me pay the bills real quick. Stay tuned from a message from our partners over at HPTRT. All right, guys, the only thing as manly as an A10 firing is you getting your hormones fixed. But let's jump into the rest of the video. Okay, so what are these strikes actually going to be looking like potentially? I talked a little bit about what you may see, small scale skirmish, cartel members trying to, take long distance shots at border control, things like that. Also, IED emplacement seems to be getting to be a big deal. Along the southern border, cartels in placing IEDs and things like that, monitoring for that. And then what aircraft do I likely see being used for? Are we going to see AC-130 gunships, decimating cities and towns, A-10s, 500-pound JDAMs being dropped on buildings? Probably not in the short term, okay? Seeing that, again, Mexico's an allied nation. But what we most assuredly will most likely start seeing is the use of Predator and Reaper drones. Okay, these are going to be much better because they can, they're going to be monitoring. We know we already have sort of spy aircraft watching things, but your drones, your Reaper drones, Predator drones can monitor huge swaths of land under ISR, constantly watching things. And they have the quick reaction ability if something like we saw the other day where 3 or 4 cartel members start shooting long shots over the border at border control and the military, these drones will be able to quickly let off a Hellfire rocket and bye-bye cartel members. Okay, so that's how I most likely see, or let's say the first strike we potentially see, I think is most likely going to be in something like that. All right, so you may be wondering what actual air assets do we have down at the southern border? Okay, so there's an article that walks us through that. We're going to talk a little bit about that next. All right, if you remember in the last video, it wasn't just the 2nd Brigade Striker Team that was headed down to the southern border. There was also an additional 60 or 650 aviation troops, active duty, that are also headed down there too. Okay, and it talked about in the last article, Blackhawks, Chinooks, things like that from Rotary. And right here, like it says here, assets already include Boeing C-17s. Those are the big boys. Lockheed Martin C-130 transports from the Air Force, and search and rescue HC-130 Juliets from the U.S. Coast Guard. Those assets are being used to deport migrants apprehended in the United States with legal status. All right. Now, most of those are not, in fact, really none of those. They're pretty much all troop carrying assets. All right, so we're going to need a little bit more information on what CAS or close air support aircraft are potentially going to be headed down to the southern border. Eventually, also, again, Reaper drones, Predator drones. That's what I think I foresee as being the most likely use case in the near term for, again, kind of like surgical strike level dealings with sort of individual cartel cells that are operating along the southern border itself. All right, so the last thing to really talk about in the conclusion is, are these strikes actually going to be used? Okay, so there's a lot of talk, especially, I think we have close to 5,000 troops down on the southern border, 10th Mountains down there, 2nd Brigade Striker teams, all these aviation units being massively bolstered. A lot of people are saying this is just a show of force. None of this is actually going to be used. I'm not sure. I think it is highly likely especially now that these approval authorities have been dropped down at the sort of, let me say, operational level, okay, not tactical level, because you don't have something like a captain in charge of dropping them. But, you know, you have general officers now who are approved to autonomously drop munitions on cartels at the border if they need to. Most likely in defense of friendly troops is how this will work in the near term. But do I think it's got real potential? Yeah, I do. I think that if you see any small skirmish of cartels start taking shots at the border of the military, or the border control of the military at the border, I think you're probably going to see airstrikes get dropped. Of course, this isn't going to be in cities. It's not going to be in urban areas. It'll be in these sort of open swaths of desert land and stuff like that. Again, this is all in the near term. But yeah, guys, I think I don't think many people really realized how important of a change this actually is, because had this change not been made, there basically is no way at the tactical level for a strike to get called in time for any sort of like immediate interdiction in a target, right? Small skirmish, vehicle interdiction, anything like that. So this is pretty big. All right. So we're going to have to wait and see. Who knows? You know, we have as early as a day from now, all of a sudden somebody gets struck, and I'm sure we will cover it once we see it. So hope you found that one interesting. Hope that clears that up and makes sense to everybody. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, and I will catch y'all in the next video.